everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. This time we're exploring No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover.
Oh,
We'd be
man.
going through some excerpts from the book, trying to understand, why so many people struggle with being too nice, how that pattern develops, and most importantly, what you can do to break free.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Glover's approach is that he kind of digs underneath the surface and really looks at like the psychology behind this nice guy persona and how it's often driven by like a really deep-seated need for approval
Mm-hmm.
and a fear of showing flaws or imperfections.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like a positive trait, right? To be nice.
Right.
But he's arguing that it can actually backfire
Mhm.
and lead to frustration and resentment and damaged relationships.
It's the paradox.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Because these men are striving to be helpful and avoid conflict, but often their actions are coming from a place of insecurity. Rather than genuine kindness, it's like they're operating under this like covert contract, where they're expecting their niceness to guarantee them love and acceptance. And when it doesn't, those unexpressed feelings can really build and turn into resentment and what he calls victim pukes.
Hold on, victim pukes?
Yeah.
You have to explain that.
It's a very vivid term, right? He uses it to describe these like sudden outbursts of anger or passive aggression
Okay.
that stem from feeling like you're a victim of your own niceness. It's like you've been swallowing all these negative emotions for so long, and they finally erupt in this unhealthy way.
Got it. So it's not just about being polite. It's about this underlying dynamic of seeking validation and suppressing your true needs.
Right.
Where does this come from? Is this something we're born with? Or does it develop over time?
Well, Glover argues that it's often rooted in like early childhood experiences,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly those that lead to what he calls toxic shame.
Okay, so we need to unpack that a little bit. This toxic shame sounds intense.
Yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
It's not just like regular everyday shame that we all experience.
Yeah.
You know, like toxic shame is this pervasive sense of being like inherently flawed or unworthy. It's like this deep-seated belief that you're not good enough as you are, and you need to constantly earn love and acceptance.
Okay, and how does that tie into this nice guy pattern?
Well, if you grew up feeling inherently flawed, you're much more likely to develop these compensatory behaviors, like people-pleasing, conflict avoidance,
Yeah.
to try to mask those perceived flaws and gain approval. So it's like building this persona
Mm-hmm.
around being nice as a defense mechanism.
So it's not that these men are intentionally being manipulative. It's more like they're operating from this wounded place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he uses a lot of case studies in the book to really illustrate how this dynamic plays out. So, for example, there's Todd, who's like a great friend. You know, he's always there for everyone. But he constantly gets passed over in relationships. And he's like, why do women always choose these jerks over me?
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't see how his need for approval is actually sabotaging his chances.
It's like he's trying to earn love instead of believing that he's worthy of it.
Yes.
And that can be a turnoff, I imagine, in relationships.
Absolutely. And then there's Alan,
Okay.
whose mother wanted him to be the opposite of his bad boy father.
Mm.
So he learned to seek approval by being the good son,
Mm.
always striving to please and never rocking the boat.
Mm-hmm.
But this pattern carried over into his adult relationships and left him feeling resentful and unfulfilled.
So those early family dynamics really shape how we approach relationships later on.
Absolutely. And you know what's interesting is he even highlights it, even like seemingly perfect families
Okay.
can contribute to this dynamic. So he talks about Jason, who grew up in a family of high achievers.
Mm.
And while they weren't outwardly critical, he internalized this message that he constantly needed to prove himself and strive for perfection to be worthy of love.
So even in a loving environment, those subtle messages
Mm-hmm.
about needing to be a certain way can stick with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's Jose, who came from a very chaotic family and learned that his value lay in fixing problems and keeping everyone happy.
Mm-hmm.
So this led him to become like the ultimate rescuer, always putting others' needs before his own, but ultimately feeling drained and resentful.
Wow. So these are all different family dynamics, but they all lead to the same underlying sense of toxic shame
Right.
and this nice guy persona.
Exactly.
It's like they're all trying to overcompensate for this feeling of not being good enough.
Yeah, and it's not just about family. Like Glover also argues that social conditioning plays a huge role, particularly for men who came of age during like the mid-20th century.
Okay.
So think about like the major shifts that were happening then. The move from agrarian to industrial society, the rise of feminism, fathers becoming more absent from daily life.
So there was this societal shift
Yeah,
that was happening, that was questioning traditional masculinity, and these men were caught in the middle of it.
precisely. And they were receiving all these mixed messages, be strong and assertive,
Yeah.
but also be sensitive and emotionally available. And then on top of that, there was this growing emphasis on women's empowerment, which sometimes got translated as men needing to suppress their masculinity in order to avoid appearing threatening.
Right. It sounds like a recipe for confusion and insecurity, especially for young men.
And that's where the nice guy persona becomes this coping mechanism. It's like they're trying to navigate this new landscape by becoming the safe option, the one who won't rock the boat or challenge the status quo.
Okay, so we've uncovered the problem, this nice guy pattern. Driven by insecurity and need for approval, we've explored its roots in childhood experiences and social conditioning. Now, the big question is, how do you break free from this pattern and create healthier, more fulfilling relationships?
Right.
And that's what we'll delve into in the next part of our deep dive.
Well, Glover offers a multifaceted approach
Yeah.
to breaking free from this nice guy pattern. He doesn't just tell you to stop being nice. He guides you through this process of self-discovery and transformation that addresses like the root causes of this behavior.
Okay, that makes sense. So where does this journey begin?
Well, the foundation
Mm.
is learning to prioritize your own needs.
Mm-hmm.
It's about shifting from seeking external validation to cultivating self-approval. You can think of it as rewiring your internal reward system.
Okay.
So instead of relying on others to make you feel good about yourself, you learn to generate that feeling from within.
This resonates with me because I used to be such a people pleaser, always putting others' needs before my own, and it just left me feeling so drained and resentful. And it wasn't until I really started prioritizing my own well-being that I started to feel like things were shifting.
That's a great example. And Glover provides a very practical exercise to help with this shift.
Okay.
He encourages readers to identify one approval-seeking behavior they engage in and consciously let it go for a period of time.
So what kind of behavior are we talking about?
It could be anything
Yeah.
from, constantly checking your phone for likes and comments
Ah.
to going out of your way to help someone, even when you're exhausted.
So it's about noticing these little ways we try to earn approval and then experimenting with doing things differently.
Exactly.
But wouldn't that make you selfish?
Not necessarily. It's about finding that healthy balance. It's not about becoming self-centered or ignoring others' needs altogether. It's about recognizing that you have needs too, and that it's okay to prioritize them sometimes.
I think a lot of people, especially those who identify with this nice guy pattern, struggle with that. They feel guilty for saying no or putting themselves first.
That guilt often stems
Hmm.
from that ingrained belief of not being good enough. But here's the thing. You might be surprised by how little others actually notice
Okay.
the things that you're so worried about. He shares this great story about Cal,
Okay.
who's obsessed with keeping his car perfectly clean because he thought it made people like him.
Hmm.
So as an experiment, he stopped washing his car for a month. Guess what? Nobody even noticed. And he realized that his self-worth wasn't tied to having a spotless car.
Oh, it's so true. We create these pressures for ourselves based on these assumptions of what others think.
And once you start to challenge those assumptions, you can really free up so much energy and mental space. So I would encourage you, the listener, to consider, what's your spotless car? What's that thing that you're doing to seek approval? That might not even be that important to others. And what would happen if you just let go of that need for a little while? You might be surprised by the freedom that you discover.
I love that challenge. But what about these deeper issues of masculinity that we were discussing earlier? How does Glover address those?
He dedicates a significant portion of the book to reclaiming masculinity, but not in the way you might think. He emphasizes that it's not about becoming aggressive or domineering.
Okay.
It's about embracing the positive aspects of male energy,
Hmm.
Strength, assertiveness, leadership,
Yeah.
and integrating those into your identity in a healthy way.
So it's about finding that balance between those traditionally masculine and feminine qualities. How do you actually do that? Where do you even begin?
One key element is connecting with other men,
Mm-hmm.
building those supportive friendships that a lot of nice guys actually lack.
Okay.
He uses this phrase, getting your testicles back, which might sound a little jarring, but it really speaks to the importance of stepping into your full power as a man without shame or apology.
Right. It's about reclaiming that part of yourself that's maybe been suppressed or demonized, and those male friendships can play a crucial role in that.
Absolutely. He shares the example of Alan, who was so used to seeking validation from women that he really avoided male friendships. He felt more comfortable in female company.
Mm-hmm.
But it was ultimately preventing him from fully embracing his masculinity.
So what changed for him?
Well, he made a conscious effort to start connecting with other men. He joined a sports team, he started attending a men's group, and even sought out a male therapist. And through those experiences, he began to really understand what healthy masculinity looks like, not based on stereotypes,
Mm.
but based on like authentic connection and shared experience.
And how did that impact his other relationships?
Well, it had this ripple effect. As he became more secure in his own masculinity, he was less needy in his romantic relationship.
Okay.
He was able to meet some of his emotional needs through those male friendships, which took pressure off his partner and allowed them to connect in a more balanced way.
It's like having a diversified emotional portfolio.
Exactly. You're drawing support from multiple sources
Yeah.
rather than putting all your eggs in one basket. And this connection with other men can also help break that monogamous bond that many nice guys have with their mothers.
Okay, what is that?
It's this unconscious dynamic
Mm.
where they're still seeking approval and validation from mom, even in adulthood. And that can really sabotage their romantic relationships.
Because it creates this unhealthy dependency.
Precisely. It's like they're still trying to please mom, even in their romantic relationships. He hears a story about Jamie's boyfriend,
Okay.
who was so enmeshed with his mother, that it was really affecting his relationship with Jamie. He was constantly seeking his mother's advice, prioritizing her needs over Jamie's, and struggling to set boundaries.
So what helped him shift that dynamic?
Joining the Marines was a turning point for him. It wasn't just about the physical training and discipline. It was about being immersed in this culture where male bonding and camaraderie were paramount.
So it provided him with that alternative model
Right.
for male connection that he hadn't had before.
Exactly. And through those bonds with other men, he was able to start setting boundaries with his mother and prioritize his relationship with Jamie.
Wow. That's a powerful example of how breaking free from this nice guy pattern can also involve redefining your relationship with your mom.
Exactly.
This idea of reclaiming your masculinity seems to be a recurring theme. But for a lot of men, especially those who've been conditioned to believe that masculinity is inherently bad, it can feel like a daunting challenge.
Yeah, it's understandable.
Right.
We live in a culture where masculinity is often portrayed in this negative light,
Yeah.
associated with aggression, dominance, toxic behavior. But Glover challenges that narrative. He argues that true masculinity is about embracing those positive qualities, strength, courage, leadership, without resorting to those harmful stereotypes.
So it's about reclaiming those qualities in a way that's both empowering and responsible.
Exactly.
But for someone who's been suppressing those parts of themselves for years, how do you even begin to tap into that?
He suggests several avenues, from engaging in physical activities that challenge you, to taking on leadership roles in your community or profession. It's about pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone
Yeah.
and discovering those dormant aspects of yourself.
So it's a journey of self-discovery, not just about adopting a certain set of behaviors, but about uncovering those authentic masculine qualities that might have been buried beneath all these layers of conditioning and fear.
Exactly. And this journey often involves confronting those early wounds around masculinity, particularly those that stem from our relationship with our fathers.
Because that's where those initial messages about what it means to be a man often come from, right? Whether it's having an absent father or one who was overly critical or even abusive.
Precisely. And those early experiences can create these deep-seated beliefs about our own worthiness and our capacity for love and connection.
So how does Glover guide men through that process of healing? Those wounds, that seems like a pretty heavy lift.
It is. But he encourages men to start by challenging those old narratives they've created about their dads. So he shares this story of Matt, who always saw his father as the villain, based on his mother's stories. His parents divorced when he was young, and his mother painted this picture of his dad as this irresponsible, uncaring man.
So Matt grew up with this very negative perception of his father, which likely impacted his own sense of masculinity.
Exactly. But as an adult, Matt decided to reach out to his father and actually hear his side of the story. And what he discovered was that the reality was much more nuanced. His father had been deeply hurt by the divorce. and had struggled to cope with the separation from his children.
So it wasn't black and white, as Matt had always believed.
Exactly. And that realization was incredibly healing for Matt. It allowed him to let go of sort of that anger and resentment he'd been carrying for years, and to see his father as a flawed human being rather than this one-dimensional villain.
That's powerful, that challenging those old narratives and seeking understanding can be so healing.
It can.
But what about those men who didn't have a father figure at all? How do they navigate this?
Well, Glover acknowledges that this can be a much more challenging path, but he emphasizes that it's still possible to reclaim your masculinity, even without that positive male role model. He suggests seeking out mentors, joining men's groups, engaging in activities that connect you with that masculine energy.
So it's about actively seeking out those experiences and relationships that can help fill that void and redefine what masculinity means for you.
Precisely.
And this process of reclaiming your masculinity doesn't just benefit your personal life, it can also transform your professional life. How so?
No. Well, a lot of nice guys really struggle with assertiveness at work.
No.
They're afraid to speak up, to ask for what they want, to negotiate for better pay or promotions.
Because they're afraid of rocking the boat or coming across as too demanding.
Exactly. But when they start embracing those positive masculine qualities, that confidence, assertiveness, leadership, they become much more effective in their careers. They're able to advocate for themselves, take on new challenges, and ultimately achieve greater success.
So it's about channeling those qualities in a way that serves both their personal and professional goals.
Precisely.
But we've also talked about how this nice guy pattern can really show up in romantic relationships. What are some of the challenges that men face there?
Well, one common issue is difficulty setting boundaries. Nice guys are often so focused on pleasing their partner that they neglect their own needs and allow themselves to be taken advantage of.
So they're afraid to say no or to express their preferences because they don't want to disappoint their partner.
Exactly. And this can create a dynamic where they feel resentful and unappreciated.
Okay.
So Glover really emphasizes the importance of recognizing that you have a right to your own space, your own needs, and it's okay to say no when someone's overstepping those boundaries.
But that can be so hard for someone who spent years prioritizing others.
It is. It's really counterintuitive.
So how does Glover help them overcome that fear of setting boundaries?
Well, he uses this very clever analogy with a shoestring.
Okay.
He has men literally feel how far they'll let someone push them before they push back. And it's this very simple but effective way to illustrate the concept of personal space and the importance of asserting your limits.
I love that. Such a tangible way to experience boundaries.
Yeah. And he also shares stories of men who have successfully set boundaries in their relationships and the positive impact it had. So he tells this story about Jake, who was constantly tolerating his wife's bad behavior, drinking, flirting with other men, because he was terrified of upsetting her.
So he was sacrificing his own well-being to keep the peace.
Exactly. But with the support of the group, Jake was challenged to set boundaries. He started by expressing his concerns to his wife and letting her know that her behavior was unacceptable.
I can imagine that was really difficult.
It was. And initially it caused this huge crisis. His wife was angry and defensive, but Jake held firm. And he refused to enable her behavior, and ultimately it led to his wife actually getting help for her drinking problem. And they were able to create a much healthier relationship.
That's such a powerful example of how setting boundaries, even though it can be challenging, can lead to long-term positive change.
Yeah, and it's not just about romantic relationships.
Right.
This idea of setting boundaries applies to all areas of life, work, family, friendships. It's about recognizing your worth and not letting people walk all over you.
Okay, so for the listener out there who's thinking, this all sounds great, but I'm terrified of setting these boundaries. Where do I even begin?
Start small.
Okay.
Pick one area where you feel most taken advantage of and start setting those limits. It might be saying no to an extra work project or, telling your friend that you can't always be their emotional dumping ground.
And it's about being consistent, not just setting it once, but actually upholding it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, it's a process. You're not going to become a boundary-setting ninja overnight. It takes practice. But with each step, you reclaim a little more of your power and create a healthier dynamic in your relationships.
Okay, so besides setting boundaries, what are some other key aspects of breaking free from this pattern?
Well, another crucial element is learning to express your feelings in a healthy way. Nice guys are often so focused on keeping everyone else happy that they bottle up their own emotions.
Which can lead to those victim pukes.
Precisely. It's like they're sitting on this volcano
Yeah.
of unexpressed emotions, and
Mm.
eventually it erupts.
So it's about finding a way to release that pressure in a constructive way.
Exactly. And it's not about blaming others or making them responsible for your feelings. It's about owning your feelings
Mhm.
and expressing them in a way that respects both yourself and the other person.
So how do you do that? What does healthy emotional expression look like?
It starts with becoming aware of your feelings.
Okay.
You know, a lot of nice guys are so disconnected from their emotions that they don't even know what they're feeling half the time.
They're so used to pushing them down that they've lost touch.
Exactly. So the first step is to just start paying attention to your body.
Okay.
You know, notice those physical sensations that accompany your emotions, that tightness in your chest, the clenching in your jaw, the knot in your stomach. Those are signals that something's going on emotionally.
Okay. So once you've identified it, how do you express it in a healthy way?
Well, it's about finding a language for your emotions
Okay.
and communicating them in a way that's clear and direct and respectful. You know, Glover uses an example of his own experience with his wife
Okay.
when she accidentally damaged their car.
Hmm.
You know, he initially got angry, but then he realized that it wasn't really about the accident. It was more about her withdrawing and shutting him out.
So his anger was masking a deeper hurt.
Exactly. And by expressing his feelings, not just the anger, but also the hurt and the desire for connection, it actually made his wife feel safer and more loved, and it allowed them to work through the issue together instead of letting it fester.
It's counterintuitive, you think, expressing anger would push people away, but when it's done in a healthy way, it can actually bring you closer.
Exactly. And this ability to express your emotions authentically is really essential for creating intimacy and trust in relationships.
So we've talked about prioritizing your needs, reclaiming your masculinity, setting boundaries, expressing your emotions. Are there any other key elements to breaking free from this nice guy pattern?
Yeah, one crucial aspect is addressing any shame or anxieties you might have around sex.
Because that's often a very taboo topic, especially for men, who've been raised with a lot of shame around sexuality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, Glover dedicates a whole chapter to this. He calls it revolutionizing sex,
Okay.
and he encourages men to become more comfortable with their bodies, to explore their desires, and to communicate openly with their partners.
That sounds like a pretty radical departure from the nice guy script, which is often about putting your partner's needs before your own and avoiding conflict at all costs.
Exactly. It's about shifting from a performance-based approach to sex,
Yeah.
where you're just focused on pleasing your partner, to a more pleasure-based approach,
Yeah.
where you're actually attuned to your own sensations and desires.
And that requires a level of vulnerability and authenticity that can be really challenging for a lot of men.
Absolutely. But it's so essential
Mm-hmm.
for creating a fulfilling and intimate sexual relationship.
So how do you start to do that?
Well, Glover encourages men to explore their own bodies through masturbation,
Okay.
to become more aware of what feels good, and to communicate those preferences to their partners.
That's a great point, because so much of the shame around sex stems from a lack of self-knowledge.
Exactly. And once you start to understand your own body and desires, you can approach sex with much more confidence and authenticity.
So it's about reclaiming your sexuality and integrating it into your overall sense of self in a healthy and empowering way.
Precisely. And this process of personal transformation
Yeah.
can really impact all areas of your life.
So it's not just about fixing your relationships, it's about creating a life that's more aligned with your authentic self.
Exactly. And that leads us to like the final piece of the puzzle, creating a life of passion and purpose.
Because a lot of nice guys are so focused on pleasing others that they lose sight of their own dreams and desires.
Exactly. They end up settling for a life of mediocrity, afraid to take risks or pursue those things that really light them up.
And that fear of failure can be so paralyzing. It's like they'd rather play it safe and stay small than risk putting themselves out there and potentially getting hurt.
So Glover encourages men to move beyond that fear and embrace what he calls an abundance mindset.
Okay, what is that? What's an abundance mindset?
Well, it's about believing that there's enough success, love, happiness to go around, and that you deserve your share. So it's about shifting from this scarcity mindset, where you're constantly competing for limited resources, to this mindset of possibility and opportunity.
So it's about believing in your own worthiness and your capacity for success and happiness.
Exactly.
But it's not just about positive thinking. It's about taking action right? Identifying those things that make you feel alive and then pursuing them.
Precise.
But for someone who's stuck in that pattern for years, taking those risks can feel daunting.
It can. But he uses these really inspiring stories of men
Hmm.
who have challenged themselves, stepped outside of their comfort zones, and achieved remarkable things.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, he tells the story about Charlie,
Okay.
who was passionate about flying, but kept sabotaging his own efforts to get his pilot's license. He had all these excuses, blaming his lack of time or money. But deep down, he was terrified of failing.
So his nice guy tendencies
Yeah,
were holding him back.
exactly.
Yeah.
But with the support of the group,
Yeah.
he was able to confront those fears and finally achieve his goal. And it wasn't just about getting his license. It was about reclaiming his power
Yeah.
and proving to himself
Mm.
that he was capable of achieving his dreams.
That's beautiful. Breaking free from this pattern
Yeah.
can unlock so much potential. It's about moving beyond those limiting beliefs
Right.
and stepping into a life of passion and purpose.
And that can look different for everyone.
Right.
It might be starting a business,
Huh.
pursuing a creative hobby,
Mm.
or simply finding more joy and fulfillment
Mm-hmm.
in your current work.
Exactly.
And often that involves asking for help,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that a lot of nice guys really struggle with.
Because they have that have to do it all myself mentality,
Yeah.
they see asking for help as a sign of weakness.
Right.
So it's about shifting that mindset
Yeah.
and recognizing that asking for help is actually a strength.
Exactly. It's about understanding that we don't have to go it alone
Mm-hmm.
and that there are people who want to support us on our journey.
Mm.
He shares this story of Phil, who was struggling in both his personal and professional life.
Mm-hmm.
And he was so reluctant to ask for help, believing that his needs weren't important or that people would want to support him.
So he was isolating himself and trying to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Exactly. But when he finally reached out to the group, they rallied around him. They helped him with everything from like home repairs
Yeah.
to starting his own business. It was a powerful example of how community and connection can really empower us to achieve our goals.
And it challenges his entire worldview, shifting him from that scarcity mindset to one of abundance.
Exactly. He realized there was enough support, love, and success to go around,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't have to struggle alone.
And this idea of embracing abundance, it goes beyond our relationships, right? It's
Yeah.
this idea that there's enough for everyone and that our success doesn't have to come at the expense of others.
Best I saw.
So we're moving away from this competitive, zero-sum game mentality and embracing something more collaborative and supportive.
Exactly. And finally, Glover emphasizes the importance of letting go, of the need to do everything perfectly.
Mm.
He actually shares his own experience
Hmm.
of writing the book, how he got so caught up in trying to make it perfect
Yeah.
that he almost paralyzed himself with fear.
It's that classic nice guy trap, striving for this impossible standard that ultimately leads to procrastination and self-sabotage.
But once he let go of that need for perfection, he was able to finish the book and share his message with the world. And it's a reminder that sometimes good enough is actually perfect.
Yeah, it's about progress, not perfection. It's about taking action, learning from your mistakes, and continuing to move forward.
Exactly. And to support men on this journey, Glover actually provides a set of rules that work. These are like guiding principles to
Okay.
help them navigate the challenges of breaking free from this pattern and creating a more fulfilling life.
I'm intrigued. What are some of these rules that work?
Well, he has several, but here are a few that stand out.
Oh.
If it frightens you, do it. Don't settle. Ask for what you want. These are very simple, but powerful reminders that we have the power to create the life we want.
I love that. They're so concise and actionable. It's like a mantra for personal empowerment.
Exactly. And it's not about following them perfectly, but about using them as guideposts on your journey. It's about experimenting, finding what works for you, and continually challenging yourself to grow.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the psychology of the nice guy syndrome to the importance of setting boundaries, embracing masculinity, and creating a life of passion and purpose. What are some key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think the most important message is that if you recognize yourself in this pattern of being too nice, it's not about beating yourself up or feeling ashamed. It's about understanding the underlying dynamics, reclaiming your power, and creating a life that's authentic and fulfilling.
Mm-hmm.
It's a journey, but it's one worth taking.
And remember, you don't have to do it alone. There are resources available. Books like this one, therapist support groups. Reaching out for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. So take that first step, embrace the journey, and start creating the life you truly deserve. Thanks for joining us on this exploration of No More Mr. Nice Guy. And until next time, keep diving deep,